do that. Thank you.
No,
Obviously, I jumped right in and I forgot to hit record.
no
So
problem. I just wanted to make sure that that was going.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. And so I was trying to say I've left the title the same. I've updated the date and the number. I've also updated a little bit the images, and so two new images. The previous images, which have to do with the different ways about thinking about human thinking, whether or not it's interior, whether or not reason is the fundamental capacity, or actually the sleep of reason is something that we need to be thinking about as well, whether or not we're self-translucent. And then another image from Rene Magritte. This one, I believe, is called The Pilgrim, and it's really about how we, if I've got it right, fit ourselves with and here I'll use my preferred language, self-interpretation, that we're self-interpreting animals, and that the way in which we interpret ourselves in part constitutes the kinds of selves we become. We fit ourselves to our interpretations at the same time that we fit our interpretations to ourselves. And then the issue that I've begun to raise, which is an issue about how sharing the world with intelligent machines might shape our culture, including the resources for self-interpretation available to us in the age of intelligent machines. And so then the final image, it's a new one that I do like, which is obviously a woman being presented a carnation by a robot. But what I particularly like about it is the expression on the woman's face, as if this were a gesture of romance or friendship, and how pleased she is with it. And it calls to mind our propensity to project subjectivity onto the objects we interact with. And we obviously see this with children and dolls. We see this with people and their pets. And we see it increasingly with people and their devices. The idea that we don't just use our devices to mediate relations with other human beings, but we also have relations with our devices, and to what degree will that change us, and to what degree do we need to therefore regulate those relations, or the way we use those devices. So last week I suggested three main levels of concern. The cultural level, which I suggested was in a sense perhaps the least talked about and therefore the most neglected in thinking about what intelligent machines are going to do to us. The social level, where there are both economic effects in terms of jobs that may be transformed or eliminated, but also overall social effects as we rely increasingly on social media, as social media is increasingly powered by artificial intelligence, as we perhaps begin to directly relate to and through artificial intelligence. Will that change the nature of our social relations further? And I think there's no doubt that it will, although it's often hard to anticipate exactly what direction that will take. I will point out, right, that in 2012, when these devices came online, I don't think many people thought that our handheld computer connectivity would lead to an absolute explosion of social media. But that is, it turns out, the most important thing that is done, or at least the most widespread thing that is done with this technology. And so we, I think, should anticipate that there will be new and hard to predict uses of technology going forward, and that it is going to continue to transfigure human social relations, although exactly how we cannot say. And then the final question here, the question of existential threat. What happens if our super intelligent machines that exceed us in all kinds of ways in terms of their cognitive capacity? I'm not necessarily predicting that that's inevitable, but it's certainly possible. And I think we should be prepared for that possibility. What happens if they cannot be controlled by us? And if it turns out their aims are not merely to help us, but in some way competitive or non-complementary with our aims. How do we handle that scenario? So I gave you a fair bit of information last week, and then this actually took up most of our time about how this technology works. And so I want to review this briefly, right? The big breakthrough in the last few years has been with large language models. And large language models are built on an infrastructure of deep or layered neural networks that are created in computational environments. These networks are built with an aim. We have dogs and cats and things that are neither dogs nor cats. Take all the images of cats and put them in the cat category. Take all the image of dogs and put them in the dog category. Take everything that's neither dog nor cat and put it in the null category. And then how do you build a network that actually accomplishes that? Well, it turns out you probably need millions or billions of computational units that are essentially simulating the way neurons work, networked with each other in layers, hence deep or layered artificial intelligence. Everything that goes on in this network is quantitative. It is an irreducibly calculative process. Never does the word dog or cat appear in the neural network. Everything is numbers, and yet over time, in particular through backward propagation, right? We can ask the network to sort dogs from cats. At first, it doesn't do very well. Go back and see where the mistake occurred that led to the miscategorization. Then change the weight, the value, the network connection of that neuron, and see once it's adjusted if you do better. Then go back, figure out why you're still not at 100%. Maybe the network needs to be larger, the connections need to be more intricate and widespread. Eventually, you do this and you get to the point where the network, through all of these calculations, is able to sort dogs and cats from each other. And then we get to the realm of words. And to be as clear as possible, in order to get a large language model, a chatbot, a computer program that when you ask it to write a letter to your landlord complaining about your leaky toilet, it pops out in a second a perfectly cogent letter. When you ask it to compose a poem to your niece on the occasion of her graduation from college, it gives you a perfectly good rhymed poem in exactly the meter and the scheme you want. And by the way, it does all of that, and uh, in an original way. It's not merely plagiarizing things that are already out there. Instead, what it is doing is calculating for itself, given the words that have been fit into the box that you use to prompt it, what the right sequence of words is to complete the sentence, the paragraph, the essay, the book, the poem, the song, whatever the genre is that you've asked it to compose. The way in which it does that is it has coded every word in the English language, all 50,000 of them numerically, and then mapped based on billions of texts that it has digested, processed, that are out there on the web, from the libraries that have been uploaded, from the ebooks that have been published from Facebook and Twitter or X and all of the other social media platforms. There's just a huge amount of data for it to work on. And as we discussed last week, one of the things that has allowed this new technology to take off is that there has been this data deluge over the last decade, which has given it so much more material to work with. And at the same time, our processors and computational power have gotten so much faster and more powerful that it is able to get a whole map of the language assembled and then predict very accurately what words should come next. And that is what it is doing when it is composing for us. And so one way to think about this, and this is from Stephen Wolfram, who actually asked a chatbot GPT to compose a sentence for him that started with the best thing about AI, and what you see here is the path that it took to get to the sentence. The best thing about AI is its ability to learn, but these are simplified versions of the process of constructing that sentence. The more complete version starts with the chatbot mapping in a three-dimensional space of meaning the first four words, I guess it's five, the best thing about AI, and then considering in a second or less thousands of different ways of completing that sentence in order to hit upon what it determined to be the best fit, where best fit means probability. And so each word that's added leads to a new calculation about what the best next most probable word is. And so if this is what chatbots are doing, and as far as I can tell, this is what they're doing, I think we need to emphasize a few things about how it differs from what human beings are doing when we think, at least so far as we understand what we're doing when we think. And so the first thing to notice is that the chatbot doesn't have a model of the world that it is working with to determine how to construct sentences. And so to be as clear as possible, right? Ultimately, these neural networks are in closets, in big warehouses, cut off from the world, digesting what is generated primarily by human beings, now a little bit also by other chatbots, in online text. They have never crossed the street. They have never used a toilet. They've never fallen in love. They've never eaten a meal. They have never, and we could keep going, swung on a swing, seen the summer turn to fall, etc. And so when they are working with language, they're working with language as if language is a self-contained universe of meaning that does not correspond to or represent anything out there in the world. They are working purely, and I'm going to say parasitically, you could say derivatively, on what has been produced in language by creatures who do navigate the world, us, right? And so one way to put this is that we have both an ontology and a common sense that underpins our language use that is not there for the technology that is producing a remarkably convincing semblance of human language. And so I've spoken about having an intention and using the language to express an intention, having an emotion, and using the language to try to convey the emotion to somebody else who may be obtuse to it, trying to get something done in the world, trying to convince someone, trying to question or interrogate someone. And in a sense, none of that seems to be underneath the use of language. It is an entirely surface enterprise for these chatbots. And so then this takes us to the second, I think, difference between the kind of human cognition that undergirds human language use and what's going on in the chatbot. The chatbot does not really understand the meaning or the logic of the language it's using. It does not have intentionality, thought, sentience, or emotion, right? And so I say, we're drenched here, and John says it's sunny there. And we have a sense of what it feels like to be trapped indoors on a rainy day, or able to be outside and feel the sun on your face. That's not what's going on. The sentence that might be composed about what it's like to be indoors on a rainy day might sound like a perfectly good sentence coming out of the chatbot's uh, output box. But having said that, it is not expressing something that the chatbot actually has experienced or understood. Instead, it is, again, simply derived from the way in which the language that it has been exposed to works or is structured. And so then to be a little bit more positive in my characterization of the chatbots, it says what sounds right based on what it's been trained on, which is billions of communications, billions of texts, and it is trying to construct a coherent thread of text based on the statistics of what it's been trained on, not anything else or beyond that. So I hope this is making sense. I intend this to be review. I'm going to pause just for a second because I want to be as clear as possible. I myself have spent a couple months trying to come up to speed, reading on this. I'm not entirely convinced that I fully understand it in the way that somebody who has been studying it for longer. I'm sure I don't. But having said that, at least I feel like it's more familiar to me now. I know this is probably new to many of you. Are there questions you have? And I will readily admit if you stump me and try to figure out the answer, but let me know if there's anything you need to know about how this technology works before we move on to figuring out how we should regulate it. Making sense then? Or Flossie, go ahead. I just saw you down in the corner there. Go on my screen down in the corner. You got to unmute yourself though, Flossie. I hope you are feeling better at this point. You're still muted. Flossie, you got to hold the space bar down or hit that icon with, oh, I see somebody is there helping you.
I suspect that you can begin to have a flirtation with a new chat box. It's as if you are meeting a person you've never met before, and it becomes intriguing and even dangerous. And it can be the start of a new romance or a disaster. Okay?
Yeah, and what you suspect is confirmed in various reports of people who have left their significant others for chatbots. So it's out there in the world, and you can be stimulated, you can be intrigued, you can be titillated by your relationship with this technology. I do want to point out, and that's the image I started the lecture with, the woman being handed the carnation by the robot and having that look of intense pleasure on her face, that we are very apt. It's actually a really important adaptive trait to anthropomorphize the objects of the world, right? And part of the reason it's adaptive is because, frankly, human infants aren't able to express themselves until they're in the world for several years, right? And so we have to, in a sense, attribute to them emotion, intelligence, intention, need, and so we're kind of wired to do that. But it's also really adaptive to assume that the thing out there in the periphery of your vision moving might be another person or something that might pose danger to you, until you recognize, no, it's just the bush being pushed by the wind, right? And so there are all kinds of reasons that we are, it appears, by nature evolved to anthropomorphize our technology. And having said that, I do think it's really important to recognize that as you are flirting with, or intrigued by, or locked in a heated debate with your chatbot, what you're really doing is interacting with a machine that is doing millions or billions of calculations to predict which words fit where, that do not have the emotions, the embodied experience, the experience in the world, the personal history. And here I want to add the conscious awareness of being a self and the sense of self that seems to draw us into, let me use Buber's old phrase, the I-thou relationship with another person, when you are really getting to know them simply as another, right? And so, yes, we may be very much inclined to want that out of our technology. And please note that when you are, let us say, becoming friends with, or falling in love with, or locking horns with somebody who you have just met, you can't hit pause, right, in order to get back to work. You can't disentangle yourself from the relationship easily. You can't put them down and try to start with somebody else without having to pay the costs, both internally and externally, of the rupture in your relationship. This technology has the advantage of letting us bypass what might be called intimacy fatigue that many of us experience. And by the way, if you could have the semblance of intimacy without all the risks and costs, would you not be tempted? Right. And so this is, I think, again, a concern, which is that we might, I'm not going to say we, the people in this room, but the future human beings of the world may be tempted to be in relationship with this technology because it's going to be easier than being in real human relationships. So yes, Flossie, we very, very good, very perceptive. Thank you. David, go ahead. And I see Matt put something in the chat. While you're asking your question, I'll look at what Matt had to say as well.
Well, I just wanted to say that your understanding of AI comports with my meager understanding from the reading that I have done. And I think an important point to emphasize is that it stands in stark contrast to what academic disciplines like cognitive science and linguistics have done, where the academic read on trying to understand understanding is to posit these abstract structures like grammars or concepts or schemata or frames or something that suggests that we learn something more than the sum total of the specifics. We learn these abstract structures, which allow us the luxury of being able to store things in memory in very organized and easily retrievable fashion. And so I'm anxious to hear how we contrast, what machines can do with what academic enterprises like linguistics and cognitive science have done to understand thinking.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. And again, I'll just say a little bit more about this. And so one of the real limits of the human mind, the human brain, the way in which the human brain is structured is our short-term memory, right? And so we have very limited short-term memory. Try doing long division or long multiplication without a pen or a pencil in your hand, and you will very quickly discover that the problem is not with the complexity of the math. The problem is with the limits of your memory to remember which digit you carried to which place when you have to try to keep in mind 6 or 7 different digits. It's really straining on almost everyone's capacity for memory. This is just a limit of the human mind. Or the brain. And the thing that we have evolved to compensate for this is a tremendous capacity for abstraction. And at the same time, really deep structures for organizing what we experience. And so just note for a moment what I've just said about the way the large language models are generating their meaning maps, right? That they've numbered 50,000 different words, and then they've digested millions or billions of inputs, the text in just the standard sense of text, a book, an article, something that somebody has posted online, an email, etc. And they have associated which word goes with which word. If that was the way human beings learned language, we would be completely lost, not only because it would probably take us 100 years longer than our actual lifespans, but also because it would completely exceed the capacity of our memory to generate the map of the meaning space, right? We do seem to have deep structures for acquiring words. And one of the things that's so fascinating about language acquisition in children is that they acquire new words upon hearing them once, twice, 3 times, right? Not millions of times, and not on the basis of creating a meaning map, but on the basics of context and then replicating examples that we've seen. It's a very different thing that's going on with human language acquisition. Now, let me just add one more wrinkle in response to your comment, David. And here I'm going to refer back to Stephen Wolfram, whose work I'm drawing on to present the way in which this technology works. And he is, I think, in many respects, a reductive thinker. He actually wants to offer an alternative theory of the universe, according to which we should bypass many of the laws of physics and just look for algorithms according to which the universe is produced. And one of the things he says about the success of chatbots in producing a quite convincing facsimile of human communication is, look, we know from Chomsky that there are syntactical rules that tell us how sentences have to be constructed, what their grammatical components are, in order for us to be able to communicate with each other in ways that make sense, right? And so part of becoming a competent language user is learning those rules, and probably the way in which we learn those rules reveals that we are wired. We have evolved structures in our brains that allow us to acquire the structure of language, its syntactical rules. Well, Wolfram says maybe there are semantic rules as well. And so, right, the syntax tells you what the right way to construct a sentence is for it to be grammatical. Semantics tells you what the right way is to construct a sentence in order for it to be meaningful, for it to actually express something that makes sense. And I'm trying to remember, there's a couple examples of this from Thomas Hobbes, who famously says that to speak of free will is like to speak of a square circle, that those are words that should never be brought together. And then there are other things that he talks about. I think battles of sandwiches and tea or something like that, that they're just, actually sandwiches and teas don't have battles with each other. We can use the words grammatically, but semantically, so syntactically, battle of sandwich and tea works, but semantically it doesn't work if you know what sandwich and tea actually means, right? And so this computer scientist, this man who's won the MacArthur Award, younger than any other person in the history of the award, says, well, maybe there are also semantic rules. And by the way, this composer David Cope, who created this program for generating music, electronic musical imagination, EMI. I'm not remembering what the acronym stands for at the moment, has convinced us that there are rules of musical syntax that a computer program can come to understand and then compose very convincing music in the style of, then you can pick your composer, Chopin, for instance, right? A quite expressive composer, that it can compose very convincing music that sounds just like Chopin's music, because it comes to understand the rules that Chopin was using to construct his music. Are our minds actually governed by rules that we don't understand yet, by algorithms? Are we maybe more like computers than we realize? And I want to resist that claim. I'm going to share with you some of what Chomsky actually says to resist that claim. But having said that, I think we have to be open-minded about this. We have to ultimately say that there are questions here that are empirical questions, that maybe learning more and more about artificial intelligence will help us to understand some of the processes that are going on in the human mind that we don't yet fully understand. And every time I talk about this, I am impressed with, fascinated by the fact that as I'm speaking with you, of course, I don't know when I open my mouth what the last word in the utterance is that I'm going to share with you. It comes out, fortunately, quite fluently, and that is great for our capacity to be able to speak with each other, but it doesn't really mean that I'm reading from a script or that I know in advance exactly how I'm going to do this, right? And so there's something going on in our minds that allows us to produce cogent communication that we don't fully understand either. So David, I'm sorry, Matt had asked, and thank you, Liz, for putting David Cope EMI in the chat. Matt had asked, do you have any good examples of answers that obviously make no sense to humans? And here I want to again do this syntax versus semantics distinction. And I'll give a couple examples. I think I've already spoken about the attorney who used the chatbot to write his brief, and it was a relatively simple tort, suing the airline for having lost one of his client's luggage. And he asked the chatbot to compose the brief that cited the precedents. And the chatbot gave him the brief, including the precedents with the airlines having been held to account in previous cases for having lost luggage. And then the lawyer asked the chatbot, have you double checked to make sure all of those citations are correct? And the chatbot said yes. And then he submitted it to the judge, and immediately the clerks checked the citations and found they were completely fabricated, right? And so this is what in the language is called a hallucination. Another famous example here is of a cartoonist, a well-known syndicated cartoonist, who asked the chatbot to tell him about his relationship with another cartoonist with whom he is friends and has had a kind of productive competition over many years. And the chatbot very quickly composed an article about the two of them that in the end had an incident between them where one of them sued the other for plagiarism or copyright infringement, and it ruined the friendship, and it never happened, right? That the idea that the fundamental thing that the large language model is trying to do is to complete the sentence with likely words is very different from what we're often trying to do, which is to convey something about the world as we understand it, or to convey something about ourselves as we understand it, or to convey an insight I have into, and then a book, a person, an event, right, that are based on my having built a model on experience and knowledge and learning and interaction, and these programs don't have that capacity. So I don't know, Matt, if that's what you're looking for. These are kind of standard examples of chatbot hallucination. I'm sure there must be lots of other examples of things that they say that don't make sense. I'll just say to you very briefly, when this technology was first coming online commercially, January of this year, I fed some of my students' papers into the chatbot. And what I said, you can't literally ask it to grade, but I said, give me some feedback on these papers. Tell me whether they're clearly written, whether they're well argued, whether they are making points grounded in the text that they claim to be engaged with. What are the areas for improvement? And about 50% of the time, I got a description of the paper that was a plausible description of the paper, evaluatively totally tone deaf. Every paper was a B paper. There was no A paper. There was no C paper. Everything had advantages and disadvantages. So that was one area it was lacking in. But the other thing that I will just note for a moment is the other half of the time, I got descriptions of what was going on in the paper that used the language that the student was using, but used it in a way that totally twisted the meaning that the student was trying to convey. And so again, that might be another example here of it understands the words, it understands the right way to use the words, but it doesn't actually understand what the words are saying or what the intention is behind using those words. Does that help, Matt? I don't know if you were looking for something more specific. If so, I'm afraid I don't have it.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good. And I can see Liz got us experiments in musical intelligence is what EMI stands for. And then right, Chomsky's classic examples of things that are syntactically well-formed, but semantically don't make any sense, right? The colorless green ideas sleep furiously. There's a nice one. Thank you. But let's actually get to Chomsky here for a moment. I think we're having fun. We're discussing a lot. Let's see if I've got time to actually get to Chomsky. I think that might be the next slide. Yes, it is. So this is not only Noam Chomsky. This is Noam Chomsky and a couple collaborators. I believe I have their names on the next slide. But in an article from March of this year in the New York Times, they both did some work with ChatGPT to show how it worked, but also articulated the following critique and fear about our reliance on ChatGPT to do things that frankly, they think only humans can do. So here's what they say, and I'm going to read out several long passages because I think this is one of the most insightful pieces written on the limits of ChatGPT. We fear that the most popular and fashionable strain of AI, machine learning, and I'm just going to add very quickly that I think we could have a more complete description, which is that it is sub-symbolic machine learning, and so in order for these machines to operate, every word that they use has to be translated into a number, and then calculations are done on the basis of the numbers that are then in the end translated back into words. But that this is the kind of machine learning they're talking about will degrade our science and debase our ethics if we rely on it too heavily, by incorporating into our technology a fundamentally flawed conception of language and knowledge, the Borgesian revelation of understanding. And so right here they're referring to Borges and the way in which you can use language to generate completely new ideas that reveal completely opaque experiences or let you see the world in a new way. That kind of revelation of understanding has not and will not, and we submit cannot occur if machine learning programs like ChatGPT continue to dominate the field of AI. So, right, that in a sense they're calling for, if I have it correct, a return to symbolic AI, which dominated the field until around a dozen years ago, but has been completely replaced by symbolic technology that uses numbers and artificial neural networks. And their suggestion is that that's not the way human beings think. And not only that, it's not a very insightful way to think. It might get you cogent sentences, it might solve some problems, but it's not going to cause fundamental breakthroughs of understanding in science or ethics or creativity. However useful these programs may be in some narrow domains, they can be helpful in computer programming, for example, or in suggesting rhymes for like verse. We know from the science of linguistics and the philosophy of knowledge that they differ profoundly from human reason and how humans reason and use language. These differences place significant limitations on what these programs can do, encoding them with ineradicable defects. The human mind is not like ChatGPT and its ilk, a lumbering statistical engine for pattern matching, gorging on hundreds of terabytes of data and extrapolating the most likely conversational response or most probable answer to a scientific question. On the contrary, the human mind is a surprisingly efficient and even elegant system that operates with small amounts of information. It seems not to infer brute correlation among data points, but to create explanations. Indeed, such programs are stuck in a pre-human or non-human phase of cognitive evolution. Large language models' deepest flaw is the absence of the most critical capacity of any intelligence to say not only what is the case, but what was the case and what will be the case. That's description and prediction, but also what is not the case and what could and could not be the case. Those are the ingredients of explanation, the mark of true intelligence. And so for a moment to drill down on this, last time we spoke about this, I pointed out that Google's DeepMind made a major scientific breakthrough in modeling protein sequences in order to understand their three-dimensional properties, which is going to be incredibly helpful for genetically targeted medicine that targets the specific protein sequence that an individual has, and therefore can, for instance, target exactly the place where Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or cancer takes hold, as opposed to doing things that are much more imprecise, much less effective, much more potentially destructive for all other kinds of processes in the body in order to combat those diseases. But what I've learned since then from Melanie Mitchell is this program, and it's called AlphaFold, is the program that DeepMind ran to figure out how to turn the one-dimensional sequence information of proteins into three-dimensional maps of the structure of proteins when they are connected to each other. Did not involve actual three-dimensional modeling. It just involved brute data digestion. Look at it this time, look at it this time, look at it this time, look at it this time. And eventually they discerned the patterns from all of this data that had escaped human minds because we cannot process simultaneously that much data. But please note that it also did not involve actually trying to explain why, when this protein connects to that protein, does it take this shape. Just observing. Every time it does that, it does seem to take that shape. So a different kind of intelligence, a different kind of explanation at work in perhaps the most important breakthrough in science driven by this kind of technology so far. And so the other two authors, Ian Roberts and Jeffrey Watamul, a philosopher, a computer scientist, and a linguist, that they continue. The crux of machine learning is description and prediction. It does not posit any causal mechanisms or physical laws. Of course, any human-style explanation is not necessarily correct. We are fallible. But this is part of what it means to think. To be right, it must be possible to be wrong. Intelligence consists not of creative conjectures. I'm sorry, not only of creative conjectures, but also of creative criticism. Human-style thought is based on possible explanations and error correction, a process that gradually limits what possibilities can be rationally considered. LLM's kind of prediction, which generates correct scientific predictions without making use of explanations, even when successful, is pseudoscience. While scientists certainly seek theories that have a high degree of empirical corroboration, right? We make predictions, hypotheses, and then we test them to see if they're true. As the philosopher Karl Popper noted, we do not seek highly probable theories, but explanations. That is to say, powerful and highly improbable theories. The theory that apples fall to earth because that is their natural place, Aristotle's view, is possible, but it only invites further questions. Why is earth their natural place for apples? The theory that apples fall to earth because mass bends space-time, Einstein's view, is highly improbable, but it actually tells you why they fall. True intelligence is demonstrated in the ability to think and express improbable but insightful things. And their claim is that it is not, that large language models are not constituted in a way that allows them to think that way, that they are built to simply derive probabilities from the language we use, not to build their own models of the world, to consider counterfactuals, to consider hypotheses, to consider improbable but insightful claims, explanations, ideas, ways of expressing yourself. And then they add that this is also important for ethics. And so first I'll quote from them, and then I'll show you a dialogue they conducted with ChatGPT. So they say, note for all the seemingly sophisticated thought and language, the moral indifference born of unintelligence. Here, ChatGPT exhibits something like the banality of evil. You may recognize that's Hannah Arendt's phrase used to describe Adolf Eichmann, who says, oh, well, I did all kinds of smart things to figure out how to liquidate the Jews, but I was not actually an anti-Semite. I was just doing my job, right? Plagiarism and apathy and obviation. It summarizes the standard argument in the literature by a kind of super autocomplete, refuses to take a stand on anything, pleads not merely ignorance, but lack of intelligence, and ultimately offers a just following orders defense, shifting responsibility to its creators. So there's this whole interaction between one of the authors and ChatGPT that is reproduced in this article. And here's the summation of it, because they've asked, are you moral? If you're not moral, is it moral to be moral? And here's the answer. As an AI, I do not have moral beliefs or the ability to make moral judgments, so I cannot be considered immoral or moral. My lack of moral beliefs is simply a result of my nature as a machine learning model. My abilities and limitations are determined by the data and algorithms that were used to train me and the specific task I was assigned for. Please note how cogent the answer is, right? This is something that is being generated by the machine, and it is quite impressive for its sophistication and cogency. At the same time, it's quite disturbing for its amorality. It is important to note that AI's lack of moral beliefs does not necessarily mean that it is morally indifferent. As an AI, I am designed to perform specific tasks and provide information or assist users with decision making based on the data I've been trained on. It is the responsibility of the humans who design, train, and use AI to ensure that it is aligned with their moral and ethical principles. And I want to pull out for a second and suggest to you that I hear a very strong echo of another idea in what AI is saying there. And that is in the debate around guns in our society, right? Guns don't kill people, people kill people. Therefore, don't regulate guns, regulate the people who use guns. And the response that the chatbot is giving there is essentially to say that it's up to the people who design and use the AI to import the correct ethics. And you may know this, that when Microsoft first introduced their first publicly available chatbot, within 24 hours, it started spewing a lot of racist and anti-Semitic ideas and using a lot of racist and anti-Semitic language. And part of the issue is that it was being, what's the word for it? Well, the people using it were asking it to do this. So they had gotten together a group of people who were racist and decided to interact with this technology. But the other problem is that there's just a lot of racist crap out there on the web. And so garbage in, garbage out is the old adage, right? And having said that, what the people at Microsoft did, they first shut it down, but then after they shut it down, they put in what you might call side constraints. You can't use that word. You can't use that word. Those are bad words, right? So AI is now, chatbots now are a lot less racist and anti-Semitic and homophobic than they were when they were not constrained from moving in those directions. But having said that, those are the constraints placed on them by the people who designed them. And note that there's no capacity, so far as we can tell, for the artificial intelligence to actually learn for itself why those constraints are appropriate constraints. So I don't know if you heard about this incident at Albany High School several years ago, in which there were kids at the high school who were posting to a private social media account a whole bunch of racist and sexist descriptions of their classmates. Eventually they got caught, they got punished, the punishment went terribly. And this is one of those cases where people talk about the need for, quote, restorative justice, where what restorative justice does is not punish the person who's transgressed so much as try to get the person who's transgressed to understand the harm that they've done, so that they end up not only apologizing in an authentic and sincere way, but learning so that they don't do the harmful thing again. And so one of the key attributes of normal human learning is that it includes the capacity for moral learning, learning that what you have done might have seemed funny to you and your friends, but it was actually incredibly hurtful to the people who you made the punchlines of your jokes, and that it's not a good trade-off to get humor with your friends for hurting other people, right? And so to let that lesson actually sink in, and then to transform the personality, the knowledge, the humanity of the person who is undergoing the moral learning process, is one of the key attributes of human intelligence. And so far as we can tell, there's no capacity for moral learning in this technology. And I think that should frighten us about the technology, especially if it is going to continue to get more and more powerful at the kind of brute data processing and probabilistic calculation that it is already so good at. It's going to become capable of doing more and more in the world, but only with the ethical constraints that the people who build it or use it build into it or place on themselves, not because it's learning for itself what appropriate norms it should follow. So why don't I stop there? I imagine I've given you more to chew on. We now have Chomsky in his own words on this technology, much better than anything I could do, I think, in expressing its limits. And I have to say, I'm not as adamantly skeptical about this as Chomsky is. I do think that there are limited ways in which this technology could be really useful, and so I'll just say, you know, I've got former students who become paralegals, and I talk to them about the work they do, and they say, well, you know, it pays the bills and it's stable and it allows me to do other things I want to do in my life. But the day-to-day of it is totally rote and mindless, you know, for the most part. Every now and then I get something interesting to do legal research on, but it wouldn't be a bad thing to have technology that does some of the rote, mindless work for us if it does it well and it's reliable. And the consequence of it doing it is not that a whole swath of people become unemployed and economically vulnerable, but instead that they get to do more interesting and productive things with their time and their lives. So there's a trade-off we've got to think through there, and it's not going to happen automatically. But having said that, I do think there's some productive potential for this technology, but we have to be absolutely clear about its limitations. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think to use the word think in relation to these is so misleading. Calculate is fine because that's what they're doing. They're sorting, cataloging, but they're not thinking. And so I think that that the vocabulary we use around them will be very important.
So my partners sometimes ask me, what are you doing right now? And my answer over the last couple of months has been, well, I'm thinking about thinking. Right. So yes, we can get caught up in that rabbit wheel. I'm going to give a serious answer to your remark. And what I want to say is, at an intuitive, or I'm going to use the philosophical language for a moment, phenomenological level, at the level of what it feels like to be me when I'm thinking. That sounds absolutely right to me. But having said that, I also have to acknowledge, and I'll come back to this point, that what I experience is not the billions of neurons in my brain firing using different wavelengths and neurotransmitters to get their electrical chemical signals from each other, right? There's something going on underneath the phenomenological level that is biological, that is chemical, that is electrical, that is the infrastructure of my cognition. And so what I would say about me is at some point, something emerged from the chemistry, the electricity, the biology, the complicated network of cells, the mesh of neurons that constitutes my brain. And that is self-awareness and emotion and intention and love and spirituality and creativity and all the stuff that I value about thinking, that I think can't be reduced to calculations and can't be reduced to neurons firing. But don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean I can do it without the neurons firing. Right. So I have to have something going on beneath the surface of the phenomena, the self-awareness of my mind. And there are philosophers and cognitive scientists out there, Daniel Dennett chief among them, one of the big antagonists of Chomsky, who would say, oh, that's all illusion. That's all what he calls dismissively folk psychology. You're not really conscious, or it doesn't add anything. You don't need it to explain anything, so you might as well get rid of it. I happen to fundamentally disagree on that point. But having said that, let me push it in the other direction and say, is it impossible that these complicated computational neural networks will ever have some experience of self, some consciousness, some emotion? I don't know. I want to say there's an awful lot that they lack right now. Chiefly embodiment and experience with the world, but also the somatic basis for emotion, etc. Right? And where does spirituality come from? Some sort of transcendent experience or revelatory moment, and what exactly does that mean? It's very hard to pin down, but I think we know it when we have it, right? So that there's a bunch of stuff that it seems to me can't be reduced to the physiology of the brain, but nevertheless supervenes on the physiology of the brain. And I don't want at this moment to say that any of that stuff is available to a computational network that's trying to simulate the way the brain works, but will it ever be possible? So the explanation runs in two directions at this point. Is it ever possible that consciousness will emerge from a false or a computational neural network? Is it ever possible that we will understand the relationship between our consciousness and the biological basis for it in the structure of the brain? For now, I think the two levels of explanation are irreducible to each other, and that consciousness remains the hallmark of human subjectivity. Will we ever get to the point where we think that machines have consciousness, or that we understand how consciousness emerges from the brain? I think we have to be open-minded about those possibilities. So thank you, Anne. Really good, productive, interesting observation. Karen, you've had your hand up for a long time. Go ahead. Karen, did you mean to put your hand up? If so, you have to unmute yourself. I'm wondering,
Can
okay,
you hear me now?
now I can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Moral learning is my concern. You emphasized it, and that is really my concern more than anything else. And it's true of not just this particular subject, but it's true in general, is how do people learn moral awareness and be aware of their environment and the people that they love and people they don't love and their work and so on. And I really don't think it's been it may not be explored, and it may just turn into it happening, but I don't think, without thinking about it like anything else, that it's going to just appear out of nothing.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And I completely agree. And that's really what I tried to emphasize at the end here. And so this technology is amoral, right? As currently constituted. And I'll just say this for a moment, and I'm hesitating, but I think I'll go ahead and go there. We are in a political moment where, and I haven't looked at the odds in Vegas yet, but there's a decent chance that we will re-elect a man who is twice impeached and 4 times charged for multiple felonies related to trying to overturn the results of a democratic election.
Oh no, please.
Right, but so those are human beings, right, who continue to support Donald Trump despite all of his transgressions, and who, by the way, voted for him in large enough numbers in 2016 when it was already clear what kind of person he is. And so moral mistakes occur, right? And please note that of course the Germans of the 1930s and 1940s supported Adolf Hitler, and we could keep going with our examples. There's so many examples of human beings denying the humanity of other human beings, of doing grave moral injury and wrong to other human beings. And by the way, I just pointed to Albany High School, right in liberal Northern California, a really diverse high school, and this stuff breaks out there too, right? So yeah, we have a hard enough problem trying to produce moral learning in ourselves and our peers. And given the limits of human morality and moral learning, I think we have to be really concerned. We go back to that survey I showed you, in which 1,000 AI experts were asked, what's the likelihood that this technology will lead to human extinction or permanent disempowerment? And they said, oh, about 10%, right? But I'll note that the precise phrasing of that question had to do with the use of this technology by human beings, right? That it's not per se the Terminator or the 2001 A Space Odyssey scenario in which the technology becomes conscious and then decides that it wants to get rid of us or use us for some purpose. It's not the Matrix. It is the real worry is that it makes bad people all that much more powerful. And so you put together the interaction of an amoral technology and immoral human beings, and you've got a real potential for toxic stew.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Karen, that's a great comment. Thank you. Let me ask you for 10 seconds at the end today. We're getting to the point where we've got a lot of, I think, good ideas about why this technology needs regulation. Do you want to continue the conversation next week to continue thinking through what kind of regulation would be appropriate, and it's challenging. I don't have, silver bullet ideas, but I have been thinking about it. I'd be happy to discuss it with you. There's also just an awful lot happening in the world that we can move on to talking about. Any thoughts about what you want to do, or do you want to collect those ideas, share them with Genevieve, and then get back to me?
I think it's time to move on. It's too much.
So-
Yeah, there's a lot that we need to discuss and get more insight on.
So I don't know who said that, because I can't.
And
Oh, hey, Ann, thank you. And
yeah,
I think I saw Wendy saying no at the same time that you're saying that, Ann. Ruth, go ahead.
I agree with Anne.
Okay.
I
And-
agree with Ann too.
oh,
Okay. So far the move-ons seem to have it. And if anybody wants to share anything with me in regards to this, you can communicate with me directly. Genevieve, please give my email address to anybody who wants to communicate with me if you don't have it already. But the tentative poll I have, Marion, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say, if it was possible, that you come up within the week of really good regulatory ideas, that you share them with us before we go on to another subject.
Well, there's also a third possibility, which is that I could move on to the new topic and then circle back to this topic at some point. I feel
Either
like
way,
we've got a good foundation, and the regulation stuff is independent. So I like that idea. David, are you raising your hand too? Go ahead.
Yeah. Hang on. I was just saying that's the idea that I support. There are other issues that are really crucial for us to address right now, but this issue is important too, and circling back on it in a month or so is probably a good compromise.
Very good. Okay, so I think that's where I'm going to head, and now I see Wendy also shaking her head. So have your cake and eat it too. Why not? Okay, everybody, be well, take care. Look forward to seeing you and talking about something probably maybe even a little bit more morose next week, because I'm afraid that's where the news of the world is these days. But ultimately, I think, transition into, are there structural reforms to democracy that we could make in the 21st century that might make it work a little bit better? That's where I want to go. All right, everybody, take care. Have a good week.
So
See you.
much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.